Imagine the sea, not calm blue water, but a battlefield. A place where future wars would be decided. Listen to this description. It's pretty powerful. Never have the gods of all the tribes put upon the seas such monsters as man now sends over them. Their steel bowels, graining and rumbling, are fed on quarried rock, their blood red and blue flames. It goes on about peering into space, voices screaming through gales, destroying things the eye can't see. That's from James D. Hornfischer's incredible book, Neptune's Inferno. And it really sets the stage for our deep dive today. We're going deep into the U.S. Navy's first big campaign of the 20th century, the fight for the Southern Solomons in 42, Guadalcanal, basically.
Yeah, and our mission really is to unpack how the Navy, which was frankly short on equipment, preparation, even understanding the enemy, how they learned a completely new kind of fight.
Right.
And how they won this critical operation on, well, the book calls it a threadbare shoestring. It really was. So we'll pull out the key lessons for you, the human stories, which are often surprising, and those sort of strategic aha moments that eventually turned the tide in the Pacific.
Okay, let's get into it. Guadalcanal. It kind of starts almost unbelievably with a single radio message, doesn't it? July 6th, 1942. News hits Washington. The Japanese are building an airstrip. How does something like that ignite this huge American offensive?
Well, see, it wasn't just any airstrip. It was the location,
No.
Guadalcanal,
Yeah.
an airfield there. It threatened the supply lines between the U.S. and Australia. Massively important. And think about this tripod concept they had. You need infantry to hold the island.
Right. Boots on the ground.
But the infantry needs supplies, so ships have to control the sea around the island.
Makes sense.
And for the ships to control the sea, especially back then, you needed air power based on the island. So infantry, ships, pilots, the tripod. And Hornfischer makes it clear this was principally a Navy's battle to win. It was the linchpin.
So everything hinged on this one spot. That's a massive gamble, isn't it? Especially for a Navy still, reeling from Pearl Harbor. You'd think maybe the fleet was all ready to go, but the reality was, well, a lot more complicated.
Oh, absolutely. Yes, they were repairing ships, but the war wasn't waiting. They built the fleet back around the aircraft carriers. But there was this huge underlying problem: fuel. The older battleships, the ones that survived Pearl Harbor, they had a vast appetite for fuel, as the book says. They were stuck on the West Coast mostly.
Stuck? Why? Just because they burned so much oil?
Pretty much. There just weren't enough oil tankers. A lot had been diverted to the Atlantic to deal with the U-boat threat. Nimitz actually vetoed operating the old battleships out of Pearl. Yeah, the math simply didn't work. They couldn't sustain them out there.
Wow. So even having the ships doesn't mean you can use them. That really changes how you think about naval power, doesn't it? It's not just about the guns and the armor.
Not at all. It's the logistics, the tail. They had, 7 tankers for the whole Pacific? Task Force 1, the battleship group, could burn through the entire Pacific's oil storage capacity in about a month. It was a fundamental constraint.
So who was in charge of this? This incredibly risky operation, though. Let's start at the top. Ernest J. King, common C, NCNO, he had this reputation, right? Like a blowtorch. He even said himself, when things get tough, they call for the sons of bitches. Was that personality type, that intensity, always helpful? Or did it cause friction, too?
That's a really good question. Look, his drive was essential. He cut through red tape. But yeah, he distrusted almost everyone's judgment, even Marshall, even Nimitz sometimes. That demanding nature, it could be disruptive. Apparently, he sometimes went around Nimitz on operational stuff, which Nimitz eventually had to confront him about.
Okay, so a complex figure at the top. Then there's Robert Gormley. He got the South Pacific Command, and that apparently surprised some people.
It did seem a bit surprising. His last time commanding at sea was, 1936, a battleship captain. More recently, he'd been an observer in London during the Blitz, more of a diplomatic role, really, and he felt the pressure. He described himself as trying to hold the line with very little strength. He even lamented not having any fighting admirals out here. Seems like he felt pretty overwhelmed.
And the early signs weren't great, were they? The carriers, Saratoga, Wasp, Enterprise, they all gathered, but then there was this rehearsal landing in Fiji, just days before the real thing, and it was a mess.
A total mess. Landing craft could get ashore, unexpected reefs, tides. One officer said the shore was like shark's teeth that would have chewed our boats to pieces. Chaos. But Hornfischer actually suggests that maybe that chaos was the best possible preparation. It forced them to learn fast right before the real thing.
Trial by fire, almost literally. Okay, so the actual landings on Guadalcanal, August 7th, surprisingly easy at first.
Yeah, anticlimactic almost. The Marines found very little opposition initially. They found Japanese equipment, even meals still on the table.
Yeah.
Looked like the defenders just vanished into the jungle.
But then, the shock, August 8th, just 2 days in, Vice Admiral Frank Jack Fletcher. He decides to pull his carriers out. Task Force 62's air cover. Gone. Why? Why would he do that? And how did the commanders on the ground react?
Well, his stated reasons were F-4F Wildcat fighter losses, getting low on fuel, and the threat from Japanese torpedo planes.
Okay, sounds plausible on the surface.
But it didn't quite add up. The story changed. When Gormley told Nimitz, he only mentioned fuel. But Fletcher actually had enough fuel for several more days. And the reaction from the Marines, pure fury. General Vandegrift said his Dutch blood was beginning to boil. Admiral Turner, in charge of the amphibious force, heatedly backed Vandegrift. They knew they needed that air cover.
So it sounds like a fundamental disagreement. Fletcher prioritizing saving his carriers, maybe remembering Pearl Harbor, Wake Island, over supporting the troops already ashore.
Exactly. That caution with carriers was deep-seated. And this decision, it absolutely set the stage for the disaster that followed that night, August 8th into 9th.
And things got worse command-wise, didn't they? Admiral Crutchley, the Royal Navy guy commanding the screening cruisers, he left his flagship.
Yeah, he went off in a destroyer to confer with Admiral Turner about Fletcher's withdrawal, leaving Captain Howard Bode of the USS Chicago in temporary command of the Southern Cruiser Group guarding one entrance to Savo Sound.
And this is where that fear of using sensors comes in. It sounds almost unbelievable now.
It does. But it was real. Hornfischer details it well. The destroyer Blue detected a plane, but the gunnery officer wasn't allowed to shoot because it showed running lights. Assumed friendly, probably wasn't. Even worse, Captain Bode on the Chicago actually ordered his ship's main search radar off. He was afraid the Japanese would detect its transmissions.
So they basically blinded themselves, intentionally. What does that tell you about adopting new tech in war? The human element is huge.
It's massive. Fear, ingrained habits.
Yeah.
They could override even obvious technological advantages. Meanwhile, the Japanese, under Admiral Mikawa, used a rain squall for cover. Classic night attack tactics. They just swept along the unsuspecting Allied line. Complete surprise.
And the result was carnage.
Total carnage. The Chicago got hit almost immediately. Torpedo took the bow off. Never even fired her main guns, effectively.
Yeah.
Then Mikawa's force just rolled up the northern group. Astoria, Vincennes, Quincy, devastated in minutes.
The book quotes survivors. Joe Custer on the Astoria having a premonition he'd be wounded. Lieutenant Jack Gibson feeling fixed by a searchlight like a bug on a pin. The chaos, ladders blown away. Just horrifying.
Absolutely harrowing accounts. And another lesson learned the hard way, cruiser aviation divisions were incredibly flammable. The gasoline, the oil, the bombs for the scout planes, they turned ships into infernos.
The Japanese had apparently learned to jettison their planes before night battles.
Yes, they had. A simple precaution the Americans hadn't adopted yet. It cost them dearly.
And then the ultimate irony. Mikawa wins this huge victory, sinks 4 heavy cruisers, and withdraws. Why?
He was afraid of Fletcher's carriers launching planes against him at dawn. He didn't know Fletcher was also withdrawing. A huge missed opportunity for the Japanese, really. They could have wiped out the transport.
Wow, the aftermath must have been devastating. 4 Allied heavy cruisers sunk. Terrible losses. You mentioned Robert Graff, survivor, describing it as an inhuman existence.
Yeah, the trauma was immense. He couldn't even talk about the battle for decades. It underscores the sheer brutality of what they went through.
So, Savo Island. An absolute catastrophe. The Navy had to learn from this, didn't they? They couldn't afford another defeat like that.
No way. It was a brutal wake-up call. And this is where you start to see a new approach emerge.
Yeah.
And new leaders, like Rear Admiral Norman Scott.
Scott, okay. Tell us about him. What made him different? He was seen as a fighting admiral.
Very much so. Naval Academy class of 1911, apparently one of the best-liked men in the class, and someone who always wanted his sword in the fight. He wasn't afraid of contact.
So how did he start turning things around? How did they actually internalize the lessons from Savo?
Well, Scott instituted what one Marine gunner called Night Fighting Course 101. This wasn't just drills, it was intense. Weeks of daily gunnery practice, high-speed night maneuvers, mock battles between ships going flank speed, and the rallying cry, "Remember Savo Island!" Sometimes, more grimly, Battle of the Sitting Ducks.
That's intense. A constant reminder of what went wrong. And technology played a part too, right? Radar?
Absolutely critical. Ships like Scott's flagship San Francisco, and especially cruisers like Helena and Boise, were getting the new SG radar. Microwave frequency. Much better resolution than the older SC sets. It could pick up surface targets much more clearly at greater ranges.
So this changed how they fought at night. How did it differ from the old way?
Completely different. The old way was visual spotting, maybe star shells, then ranging shots.
Yeah.
Fire, watch the splash, adjust fire again. Took time.
Yeah.
Very uncertain at night. With the SG radar connected to the fire control computers, you could get radar laying the guns, get range and bearing, put the guns on target, and fire for effect immediately, even without seeing the enemy. A huge leap. But, crews had to learn to trust the radar picture over what they thought they saw or didn't see.
Yeah.
That was the big psychological shift.
And this new training, new tech, new attitude, it gets tested at the Battle of Cape Esperance, October 11th, 12th.
Exactly. Scott took his task force out specifically to intercept a Japanese reinforcement run. A hunt mentality, not just defensive screening.
How did it go? Was it a clean victory?
Well, not entirely clean. There was some initial confusion. Scott's orders were maybe a bit unclear, destroyers got separated, mix-ups between true bearings and relative bearings. The fog of war is always there. But the core tactic worked. The Helena, with its excellent SG radar and gunnery, just opened up, firing in a continuous staccato, the book says. Her first and only business was hitting surface targets.
And the Boise. She got hit pretty bad, but there's that anecdote.
Right. Lieutenant Commander Tom Wolverton, the damage control officer. Amidst the chaos, fires raging, he decides to break the tension, grabs the intercom and yells, "Daddy, I want to go home now." Apparently it worked. Got some grins out of the crew under incredible stress. A fantastic human moment.
Incredible. But there was friendly fire, too.
Unfortunately, yes. In the melee, U.S. cruisers fired on Japanese ships that happened to be on the far side of some U.S. destroyers, like the Fahrenholt and Duncan. Those destroyers got caught in the crossfire. Tragic. But overall, a clear American victory. Scott had crossed the Japanese T. They were caught by surprise. Hornfischer says the Japanese never knew what hit them. A definite turning point in tactics.
But the Japanese weren't giving up. Just days later, October 13th, 14th, all hell's eve.
Yeah. That was the night the battleships Congo and Haruna came down the slot and just pounded Henderson Field on Guadalcanal. Nearly 1,000 heavy shells. A Marine gunner's mate called it a terrifying holocaust, said, "We were literally blown out of our bunks." Can you imagine enduring that?
The psychological impact must have been crushing.
Absolutely. And her combat officer described the feeling, the hopelessness, that nobody gave a curse whether we lived or died. It was about the heaviest shelling anyone had endured up to that point in the war. Made the Marines feel utterly abandoned.
Okay, so things are still desperate. This leads to another change in command, a big one. Gormley's out.
And Vice Admiral William F. Bull Halsey is in. His arrival was like flipping a switch. Electric, the book says. A shot of adrenaline for the whole command.
What was it about Halsey? Just his personality?
Partly, yeah. He was aggressive, decisive, action-oriented. One of his first moves was basically commandeering the French governor's headquarters in Noumea for his own. Sent a clear message about who was in charge and focused on the fight. And his message to his commanders was simple and direct. Strike, repeat. Strike. No ambiguity there. He wanted to hit the enemy hard.
And that new attitude, that aggression, gets put to the ultimate test almost immediately. The Naval Battle of Guadalcanal, mid-November 1942. A series of brutal clashes.
Really the climax of the naval campaign. It starts with the first naval battle, night of November 12th, 13th. Rear Admiral Dan Callahan's cruiser force against Admiral Abe's bombardment group, including the battleship High.
With Callahan, you mentioned he had a tragic flaw. He trusted people over technology.
It seems that way. Hornfischer suggests he heavily relied on voice radio communications and maybe didn't fully utilize the superior radar on ships like the Helena, which could have given him a clear picture much faster. Instead of a coordinated attack based on radar, it turned into what the book calls a nearly blind head-on collision, a brutal point-blank brawl in the dark.
And the results were devastating. Callahan's flagship, the San Francisco, took terrible hits. The bridge was destroyed.
Yeah, both Callahan and Norman Scott, who was also on the San Francisco, were killed. Incredibly, Lieutenant Commander Bruce McCandless, the senior surviving officer on the bridge, managed to keep control of the ship amidst the chaos. Pure heroism.
And the USS Juno, that's where the Sullivan brothers were.
Yes, all 5 of them. The Juno took a torpedo during the battle and was badly damaged. Then the next day, while withdrawing, she was hit by another torpedo from a Japanese submarine and just disintegrated. A terrible tragedy.
And there was even friendly fire again. PT boats mistook the damaged cruiser Portland for an enemy.
It just highlights the absolute confusion of night actions, especially back then. But despite the heavy losses, including 2 admirals, Callahan's force did manage to turn back Abe's battleships and prevent the bombardment of Henderson Field that night. A strategic win, but at a horrific cost.
But it wasn't over. Halsey wasn't done. He makes this incredible
The
decision.
gamble, yeah. Sending his battleships, the Washington and South Dakota, into Savo Sound, into those confined, dangerous waters where cruisers had been massacred. It went against all doctrine at the time.
Battleships weren't supposed to fight in restricted waters at night.
Right.
Too risky.
Exactly. But Halsey knew he had to stop the Japanese from reinforcing and bombarding the island. This leads to the Second Naval Battle of Guadalcanal, night of November 14-15.
And leading this battleship force was another key figure, Willis Ching Lee.
Right. Rear Admiral Lee, a very different personality from Callahan, described as having a very mathematical, ingenious mind. He was a gunnery expert, obsessed with integrating new technology like radar into tactics. He understood the machines.
And his force runs into another Japanese bombardment group, this one led by Admiral Kondo with the battleship Kirishima.
That's right. And again, it's a confusing night battle. The destroyers in Lee's screen took a beating, absorbing torpedoes. Hornfischer notes they indirectly deceived the Japanese and probably saved their bacon, the battleship's bacon.
But the climax comes down to the battleships, doesn't it? Washington versus Kirishima.
It does. The South Dakota suffered an electrical failure, basically went dark, and took a lot of punishment. But the Washington, under Lee's command, using its radar flawlessly, it found the Kirishima. And at close range, body-punching range, as Hornfischer calls it, Washington opened up with its 16-inch guns, radar-controlled fire. The Kirishima was just devastated. Couldn't recover, sank later.
A U.S. battleship sinking a Japanese battleship in a night surface action. That must have been a huge moment.
Huge. It effectively ended Japan's major attempts to retake Guadalcanal by sea. The U.S. Navy had finally, definitively, learned how to fight and win at night in the Solomons.
But the cost of learning these lessons was just immense, wasn't it?
Terrible. The book constantly emphasizes the human price. The dead, the wounded sailors fished out of oily water, the psychological scars. That quote from Robert Graff about the inhuman existence really sticks with you. The trauma was profound and lasting.
And after the battles, especially Savo, there had to be some reckoning, some accountability.
There was. The Hepburn Report investigated Savo Island. It blamed complete surprise, yes, but also inadequate condition of readiness, failures in communication, and it did point to Fletcher's withdrawal as a contributing factor. Captain Bode, who commanded the Chicago and ordered the radar turned off, later admitted his grievous error of judgment. Tragically, he took his own life later.
And the Juneau incident? The failure to rescue survivors immediately.
That was controversial, too. Captain Hoover of the Helena, the senior officer nearby, didn't stop fearing submarines. Nimitz ultimately supported Hoover's decision, showing that virtue of restraint in second-guessing combat commanders, a difficult balance between accountability and understanding the pressures of command.
Looking at the bigger picture, these brutal naval battles around Guadalcanal in late 42, combined with El Alamein and the North Africa landings, this was seen as the turning point, wasn't it, globally?
Absolutely. The Collier's editorial at the time literally called the first 2 weeks of November 1942 the turning point of the war.
Yeah.
Guadalcanal, particularly the naval victories, secured that flank in the Pacific and allowed the U.S. to stay on the offensive.
And there's that final quote you mentioned from Marine General Vandegrift. It really drives home the Navy's sacrifice.
It does. He sent a message lifting battered helmets in deepest admiration for Admiral Scott and Callahan and their men. And he acknowledged the stark reality. Almost 3 sailors had died in battle at sea for every infantryman who fell ashore.
3 sailors for every Marine or soldier on the island. That really puts the naval struggle in perspective. It truly was Neptune's Inferno.
It was a crucible where the Navy had to relearn everything under fire.
So as we wrap up this deep dive, the story of Guadalcanal, through Hornfischer's lens, is really about this incredibly steep, brutal learning curve for the U.S. Navy. It involved immense courage, terrible sacrifice, flashes of ingenuity, and yeah, some very human flaws and mistakes from the commanders and sailors involved. They learned on the fly, paid an awful price, but ultimately forged a force that could win the Pacific War.
Exactly. And maybe the final thought for you, the listener, is about that cost of learning under such extreme pressure, the psychological toll. When individuals or even organizations today have to, solve the puzzle of victory on the fly, how much of that hidden cost, that trauma, goes uncounted? And what does that mean for how we support and remember the people who bear that burden? Something to think about.